when I decided to leave, I was out of California now, and I was in Centennial Park. I was in the headquarters. I had made the announcement video from there. That made it even worse. She asked, "What's going on?" And again, I didn't think anyone understood. I told her everything that I could in like 2 minutes. I was born in this, left everything, leaving my relationship. I just hurt myself, leaving everything I've ever known. Didn't think she understood, but she said 2 words, and then I just burst out crying.
Welcome to part 2 of Growing Up in a Polygamy Cult with my friend Calvin Wayman. Calvin is a former member of a Fundamental Mormon cult, and in part 1, he told us all about what it was like growing up with 4 moms and 44 siblings in a very isolated and secretive environment. Today, we're going to be talking about how Calvin got out of that cult and what he went through to escape that lifestyle. Calvin, thank you so much for joining me again.
It's good to be back for round 2.
Part 1 was so interesting and for me, mind-blowing because there's so much about your cult that was similar to the cult that I grew up in, the Shiny Happy People cult, right?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the rules were the same. No dating. You got to wear dresses. You have to live this kind of purity lifestyle. But that's about where the similarities stopped, and yours just went next level. The stuff about growing up adjacent to Warren Jeff's cult. I mean, how crazy. And you talked about how, you had to kind of hide because you were living in Salt Lake City around a ton of people, but here you were, here was your family practicing polygamy, which is illegal.
Yep.
And at any time, if anyone had found out, they could have had your dad arrested, right?
Yeah, at least that's the fear that we had, that my dad or any of my parents could go to jail. And so that's what made us so secretive, which honestly got exhausting after a while.
I'm sure. I can't even imagine. But then you also talked about how your dad and more specifically your grandfather, who was your prophet, right?
Yep.
In
one of the council, one of the 6.
Yeah. They let you go to college. And that's where you finally started seeing some cracks in this faith that you grew up in, right?
Yes.
Was there something like one thing that you realized and had the aha moment where it was like, I got to get out of this? Or was it all just very gradual?
It was gradual, but there was something that that got me to that point ultimately, in a sense. So going to college was the crack. And then what blew the door wide open is I got out of the bubble. So I left Utah and went and lived in Southern California. And not only is that a different state, more liberal than the environment I'm in, it's not even that. I was now outside of it for the first time.
Right.
And it's it's a culture shock. But like, I always knew California was over there, but it did not feel like that I was just in California. It felt like I was in a different world.
Right.
And if you can imagine, like, everybody is Mormon when, like, growing up the way that I grew up. And even if they weren't, if it was somebody else and you told them you were fundamentalist Mormon, they would know. And something strange happened when I went to California. I started to open up to people I trusted about who I was, where I came from. And one of the most surprising reactions to that when I would tell them I was Mormon is they were like, "Oh, what's that?" My whole existence was that. And so I was like, wait a minute.
Some one knows about this stuff?
Yeah. And there was just something about that made it feel smaller, my world smaller, even though it was everything. And I started to realize how much bigger the world was and how small this life was, that felt so significant. And then things just started stacking on each other. Have you ever heard, so in Christianity, there's this whole line of reasoning on all sorts of narratives of the nature of God, the nature of reality. But then every once in a while, we hit into some sort of dead end. And as soon as there's some dead end and somebody says, well, what about this? And it can't be explained. There's this common line in Christianity. It says, it's a mystery.
Right. Yeah.
Or God works. You've heard this before.
Oh, yeah.
God
Of
works in
course.
mysterious ways. Mormonism has something like that, where once dead ends happen, there's a line that we've always been used, and it's called, oh, if it doesn't make sense yet, put it on the shelf. If
Okay.
it doesn't make sense, put it on the shelf. This is something that anybody that's Mormon or connected to Mormonism is like right now listening, like, yes, we totally had that. Whether you're fundamentalist or LDS, common phrasing, don't throw it away, put it on the shelf. There's a whole conversation about that one thing, just because, like, we could have a conversation about just the psychology in that, like, you question something like, why don't black people have the priesthood? And
Right.
that's something that you actually want an answer to, but you're conditioned to not investigate it, just put it on the shelf until it makes sense. So when I moved to California, the best way to think about it is there started to become a lot of things that I was needing to put on the shelf. There was a lot of things that weren't making what that I was like, what the matter? What's with this? What's with this? And here's a big one. It actually was other good people that really blew this open. So I moved to California because I quit my day job and wanted to be an entrepreneur. So I always had this drive for freedom, working for myself, and I went and did door-to-door sales, selling solar in Southern California.
Oh, okay. Now,
To be
were you married at this point?
Yes. So I was married at this point.
Okay.
I was married, had a 1-year-old son at the time. We loaded up the U-Haul, went to California with no freaking, no guarantees. It was a wild experience.
Did you have family members out there? I mean,
Zero.
Why did you pick Southern California?
I had a buddy who had gone out there. He and I worked at the same job, and he had gone out there, and I was honestly looking for some out for a couple of years because I did not belong in somebody's cubicle. And so as soon as he went out there, I was like, okay, this is my move. I had gone to school for business and entrepreneurship, and so I wanted to have my own type of thing. And I had also heard from people that door-to-door was like good character building, that if you could do 4 months of door-to-door sales, then that was worth more than a 4-year business degree. I was like, well, if I want to be an entrepreneur, then let's go do it. I also thought it was going to be easy because it was Southern California. It was solar. The problem was everybody else thought that too. And so you're like when you're knocking on somebody's door, you're like the 15th company that has knocked on their door in the last month. And so they're so annoyed. But it really was a good experience. So I went there for a year. But while I'm out there, I was doing door to door, and I also knew I wanted to start some sort of an online business. And I ended up hiring this business coach that was super Christian. And this is really what started to open the door for me, because twice a month, he would do these meetups at his house for some of his friends, myself included, where we would come to his house to talk about business, but from kind of a biblical perspective. Now, I'm not particularly religious or anything like that, but one of the things that we did to start the meetup after socializing is they would share stories of good things that happened in their life around their business, something to be grateful for. And there was this undertone of like, having gratitude to God and stuff like that. He called them God stories of like just showing gratitude. This was such a big deal for me because I talked about this on the first episode a little bit. The reason Mormons feel that they are the one true church is because they have this thing called the priesthood.
Right.
The priesthood is what allows you to speak for God. It's also what allows blessings in your life. I was taught growing up that literally every good thing that I ever had was from the priesthood. From
I gotcha.
my life to the things I enjoyed, my actual spouse. Blessings came from the priesthood.
Oh,
And here I
interesting.
was seeing
Hmm.
amazing things come to these people. What? They
They
don't
don't have the
have the
priesthood.
priesthood.
How are they
What's
getting
going?
blessings?
And it confused me. I remember thinking, is this the devil confusing them and they think it's coming from God? It can't be. It must be coming from the devil, but they think it's coming from God. Like I was genuinely
Wow.
confused. And the more I started talking and seeing these people, I ended up going to this church called C3. Again, I'm not particularly religious, but it was just a completely different environment
Sure.
than because he was like, yeah, come. And I was like, I felt welcomed. I felt good energy.
Uh-huh.
And I think you and I were talking a little bit offline, how humans learn well through contrast. And so I'm living this life in California, but I would travel to Utah every so often, every month, every 2 months, every 3 months or whatever, to go to church. And then I sit in my church and I'm like, I'm noticing a difference here.
Yeah.
It's very much like, you better do this or else you're going to hell, or that, like, it's really fear based. And then I'm
Yes.
starting to have this internal dialogue of how do I want to live my life? Do I want to how do I want to live even my eternity? Like, do I want to be scared into heaven? Like, that was a big question for me. And I was like, do I want to be governed by fear? Like, do I want to not do something just because I'm afraid of it? And I started to recognize how that was such a big thing. And then I started to open up to my closest friends. I started to tell
Mm.
what things that I was taught and believed, and started to realize that the only reason I would believe it at all is because that's what I was used to. And there was stuff that just didn't resonate with me. And so for the first time, I started to say, you know what? Like, there was stuff about, the LGBTQ community. There was stuff
Hmm.
about, race. Race was a big one
Yeah.
because in Mormonism, especially fundamentalist
Hmm.
Mormonism, it's incredibly racist. So in fundamentalist Mormonism, Black people cannot hold any sort of church position. Black people cannot have the priesthood.
Yes. That was one of the questions that came up from part one is, is fundamental Mormonism, do they still hold some of the racist tenets that old Mormonism held?
100%.
Yeah. Hmm.
Yes. And so it became very clear to me that it was incredibly uncomfortable to um, think that I was somehow better than anyone due to the color of my skin.
Yeah.
That did not make sense to me.
Hmm.
I started to collect friends of different cultures, ethnicities, and that was a really big one. Then I started traveling. Like, I started being like, okay, I need to see what I actually believe in. And I started going to, like, Costa Rica, Israel, Thailand, London, Paris. Well, a big one was like going to Israel. I went to the Western Wall. I talked to a bunch of Orthodox Jews there, and seeing how devout they were in their faith.
Right.
And that no one there, not like people in California, didn't know what Mormons were, except once I started telling them, oh yeah, you guys have like a castle looking thing on the side of the freeway. Our temples, like LDS temples. People in Israel had no idea what Mormons were, let alone fundamentalist Mormons. But they were so excuse me, they were so devout
Mm.
in their faith. And it just made me start to realize there's more than one way.
Yeah.
And if there's more than one way, what way's right for me?
And why am I so steeped in this particular way? If there's so
Exactly.
many ways out there, why am I so tied to this one particular way?
I love the line that you're going into, because that's what I feel like ultimately happened. Is it went from less of an external inquiry about why do they believe that, why do they believe that, to why do I
mm, yeah.
believe this, what makes me believe this. And I would use other religions to help me in that dialogue with myself. Like, I would ask, why is anybody in Warren Jeff's church in that church and not the work?
Hmm.
Ours is obviously the right one.
Yeah.
That's what I might have thought at one point. Why? Well, because their parents told them
Mm-hmm.
that they were the right one. And it's what, oh, so too bad for them. Like that sucks. They just happen to be born in the wrong spot. And so that's why they believe it. But then I'm like, well, wait a minute, Cal. Couldn't they say the same thing about me?
Exactly.
And I started to really look at that and be like, whoa. And then I found some stats somewhere along the way. I think I mentioned this on episode 1, but maybe not, where whatever religion you hold at like a young adult, there's a 75% plus chance that it's the same religion of your parents.
Mm.
And I was like, wait a minute. There's so many religions. There's so much difference. And this whole time, I thought genuinely with myself that I was in it because it was the truth and that I had a testimony of it. And now I'm starting to realize these other people feel the same thing about their religion, but it's very obvious to me that that's not why. That's not really because they have that testimony. They didn't discover it. They were in it. They were
Yeah.
born into it, and then they justified it. And then I asked, myself, where are you doing that? And there were just so many things that started to just not make sense. I remember, again, I'm flying places now, and there was one particular time I'm on the plane. I love flying. It's where I have I guess my deepest thinking. It's where I have like perspective. I'm above everything. And one time because during this whole period, like there's not a waking moment where it's not on my mind. Every aspect of my day, because it's my life on the line, my soul. And I remember looking out the window once, and the ground looked like a quilt. So
Yeah.
a bunch of farmland,
Uh-huh.
you know. And Centennial Park, the church that I'm from, or the work as it's called, is in a square mile. And I had imagined in this quilt below me that one of those was my church. And I imagined being God, looking at the entire quilt of all of these square miles, of all these different kinds of people and things. And I thought, what are the chances that I'm in the one right square of all those squares?
Wow.
But beyond that, I asked myself, if I'm God, would I be choosing just one of those? Like, would I be making like that one square, they're the only good ones?
Yeah.
Everybody else is wrong at best, evil in other cases. Like, I don't know if I want to live this way. And so then I'm really starting to consider that what if this is not true?
And how old are you at this point?
29, almost turning 30. So I've lived my entire life in this at this point.
And really you'd only started to question it when you were in your early 20s, right? Like
I
around
started,
21.
yes. So it took like 8 years from the crack
Mm-hmm.
to leaving.
Wow.
So now for the first time, I'm considering, what if I leave this? That opens an entirely new can of worms. In fact, I get goosebumps again when I go there, because as soon as I start asking myself, what if I leave? The fear of hell and damnation was so incredibly strong. Because what if I'm wrong? What if I leave and I shouldn't have?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There was this time period during this phase where I almost did not feel safe in my own thoughts,
Wow.
because we're taught in fundamentalist Mormonism that there was a very clear plan before we were born. There's a very clear plan while I'm here and where I'm going.
Yep.
It was all laid out so clean, so this, and couple things there. Number one, I could be like life is like this and eternity is like this. And so my one decision in this moment could fuck up my entire existence.
Absolutely. And you can blaspheme with your thoughts.
Yes.
Just having the thought that, oh, maybe this God isn't actually how it is that I've grown up with, that's been
Yes.
indoctrinated. maybe this isn't really the way. That is considered blasphemy.
Totally.
And so I totally get where you're coming from, because I had the same issue growing up where it was like, is this really it? Is this what I'm supposed to be doing? Is this how my entire life is supposed to be structured? And you start thinking that, and you pull that thread, and it starts unraveling a little bit, and then you get to your idea of God, everything that you've been taught about this all-knowing, all-seeing, omniscient being, right? Uh, and if you start to question that, immediately the guilt complex starts hitting you in the back of the brain.
Totally. I had that. And
Mm.
it put me in like a dark place for a while, because I was gambling with my soul while I'm trying to figure this out. And and I keep going back and forth, like, okay, what if I'm wrong? Maybe it's it. And I would do these thought experiments with myself. One of them was, okay, knowing what I know now, because I've traveled a lot, I've seen different faiths. If I was on neutral footing and I hadn't been conditioned,
Mm-hmm.
let's imagine I lived in Israel my whole life.
Yeah.
Would I be clawing my way to get into fundamentalist Mormonism? Probably not. And so I then started to really see what do I believe?
Yeah.
And if I was on, this is a question I ask people all the time. If you were on neutral footing, can you honestly say that you would choose the religion, the belief system, the life that you're in now?
Mm-hmm.
And so I would do those things, and I started like, I don't think I would, because then there's all these things around, the way my religion viewed gays and, again, race and stuff like that. I'm like, do I want to? No, I like, that doesn't feel good to me.
Mm.
And so I remember I then started telling my friends about this dilemma that I'm in,
Mm.
that I'm considering leaving, and how hard it was. And there was one weekend in particular where I'm just like almost sobbing. And I had a few friends around me, like, just saying, talk to me. What does this feel like? And I'm just like, I think I don't believe it. And I said it out loud for the first time. I didn't fully said I'm going to leave, but I was like, I'm questioning it. And they're like, what's going on with you right now? And I was like, I'm afraid.
Mm.
I'm afraid of what? Of hell, of damnation, of me ruining my entire existence up.
Mm-hmm.
And then one of my friends said, describe what you anticipate hell to feel like. And I describe it to them. And then they said, isn't that kind of what you're feeling like right now?
Yeah.
And there was something in that was like, the thing that I was fearing, I was already living.
Yeah.
I was living in hell.
Mm-hmm.
And so somehow that gave me this freedom to really take a step back and see what I believed in. And then there's this moment. I actually pulled up my phone, the moment that I decided, and I start talking out, like, I'm like, I'm about to say something I think I've never actually voiced or said to myself out loud. And it's interesting when I play back that voice memo, because it takes me forever to say it, to
Mm.
say the words, I don't think I am going to stay.
Wow.
I think I'm going to leave. That was such a crazy moment. It's so wild, because the other thing outside of the fear of going to hell, there's so much comfort in having a roadmap
Right.
laid out for you
Mm-hmm.
already,
Yeah.
saying this is your life. So I'm not just leaving everything I've ever known and leaving something that, what if I'm wrong? I'm going to go to hell.
Mm-hmm.
I'm also stepping into a fuckload of uncertainty,
Yeah.
a life of, there is no blueprint to
Mm-hmm.
this. There was no, where am I going after this? People ask me, what was the thing that made you ultimately make that decision? Tie back to the cult, or to the cave story that I talked about in
Yeah.
episode 1. I was like, how do I want to live my life? because I'm now in this dilemma. I'm like, I could be wrong and I could go to hell. But how do I want to live? Do I want to live avoidant? Do I want to live of I'm not taking a step out of fear? What it really came down to is, am I gonna what's creating the fear, or even the story of hell out here? It was the projection of my church leaders,
Mm.
what I was told, the books I read. It was not, I didn't ever discover these things that I'm fearing. I was told them.
Right.
It was a projection.
Mm-hmm.
And so I asked myself, do I want to live a life that is me behaving from what the outside world is putting on me? Or do I want to follow my own gut and my own internal guiding system for the first time?
Right.
That might seem obvious in retrospect, but following this one could be dangerous because it
Yeah.
could mean I'm going to hell
Mm-hmm.
if I'm wrong. But what I came to, and by the way, just a quick side tangent on Mormonism, this is such a big deal where that is so demonized. It's why you need priesthood, because you are flawed. And if you listen to your internal self, you can't, like, you might be wrong. You need to give that up to God, the church leaders. That's why they find you your spouse and all
Mm-hmm.
that stuff, because you are flawed.
Right.
And I realized that might be true. I could be flawed. I could be flawed in my thinking. This could all be for selfish reasons. I could just be justifying that I want to, live an easier life, that I want to go, explore anything, my sexuality,
Mm-hmm.
different people living in different parts of the world. Like, are all those things wrong? Like, is that just me being selfish? And what it came down to is, even if it meant that I was going to hell, if I could go to hell, I'm willing to face that,
Mm.
because I do not, did not, and do not want to live a life that is someone else's life.
Yeah.
That is some external thing telling me what I should do, how I should think, or how I should behave.
Mm-hmm.
It has to, like, on my deathbed, there's this saying that I want to die on my own sword, so to speak. Like,
Mm.
I want to make my life choices based on what I feel. And so for the first time that day, it felt like I could take a sledgehammer and knock that shelf to pieces, because all the stuff that I was putting on the shelf, I'm now saying, oh, I don't have to rationalize that
Right.
anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, fuck the shelf.
Uh-huh.
I'm not better because of how I was born or the shape or the color of my skin.
Mm-hmm.
Fuck that. I don't think that that there's only one way to live.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that I'm a bad person if I want to live differently than what everybody else around me thinks. I don't think that I need to live in Utah or Arizona. I don't think that's the only true places on God's green earth
Right.
where good people are,
Yeah.
you know? And so then I started to, like, that was it. That was the moment. That was the thing that made me say, like, that was like, I'm going to live a life from my own internal guiding system, from the inside out, instead of the outside world telling me how I should think or act or behave.
And this is where it's like you mentioned in part one, this is where the real traumatic stuff starts kicking in, right? Because it's exactly like we talked about. Growing
You're
up
so right.
in the cult, when that's all you know and that's your life and that's your reality, it's really not that overly traumatizing.
Yeah.
And we know bad stuff happens and it's awful, it's horrible, right? But it's not that overly traumatizing when you're in it. But now that you've made the decision, I'm done with this, I'm moving on, I'm claiming my own life, I'm standing in my own truth, that's when it starts to get really, really tough.
Oh yeah. And it did.
Mm.
I had no idea. Like, I thought that was the tough decision, and it was. That decision to this day is the hardest decision I've ever made in my life.
Mm.
Because of what it felt like was at stake.
Yeah.
And it was so many things at stake. But you're so right. I had no idea what would come after it. Because one of the things that happened was I was like, okay, I'm going to live, as you said, I'm going to live in my truth. I didn't want to be shy about it. I was done living a life of secrecy. I was done. And I also didn't want to play the half in, half out game.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want people to think I was in and not. I was like, I wanted people to know. And so we had social media and stuff. Some tight religions don't, but we did. And I announced it on my social media.
Wow.
Yeah.
And your dad, your four moms, your siblings, I'm assuming they have access to social media as well.
Yes, actually, that's actually a good point. Sidestep. Before I announced it, I went and told my dad. He
Oh
was like
wow.
yeah. I traveled to his house. There was going to be Thanksgiving at his house, and I went there the day before Thanksgiving, and I went and told him, and it was like, "Yo." I asked him if we could go up into his room in a private place, and I was like, "I just want to let you know, I've made the choice. I'm leaving the work." It's difficult to convey what he hears when I say that.
Yeah.
In Mormonism,
Yeah.
literally, it would have been better on him if I came to him and said, "Hey, Dad, I've really given this some thought, and I'm going to end my life.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Yep.
it's just been too tough. I have one more week, and then I'm just going to end it." As a
Mm-hmm.
parent, hearing that, obviously, that would be crazy. You'd want to, but in fundamentalist Mormonism, we are literally taught that it would be better to have never been born
Mm-hmm.
or to have some freak accident than to leave.
Yeah.
Because to leave is to flip off God
Yep.
for the beautiful blessing that he gave you.
Mm-hmm.
And you're judged not by your actions all the way. You're judged by the knowledge that you had
Right.
and then how you acted.
And you're not telling him I'm ending my life. You're telling him I'm ending this life and I'm ending my eternal life as well.
Yes.
That's
Yes.
what he heard, right? And
yes.
I mean, I understand exactly what you're talking about because in fundamental Christianity, it's very, very similar to what you're talking about. So what
Yeah.
I mean, what was his reaction to that?
He was sad. And the first thing he did is he got up and he started like getting books and said, "Before you fully decide, please read these." And he gave me books, all books that I had already read,
Yeah.
all books in my
Mhm.
study. And I was like, okay, Father, because that's what we use. We didn't use Dad because Dad was too informal. Okay, Father, I will take these. I'll read through some of them, but I've decided. And it was a heavy thing, but it was a freeing thing, because my dad was he was my he was my advancement
Yeah.
through life. Like when you go through fundamentalist Mormonism as a young boy, the first thing you want to do is you want to get baptized, because baptism, that doesn't happen at birth like a lot of churches. It doesn't
Mhm.
happen till 8 years old. And you want to be good enough to get baptized because then you're in the army of Jesus.
Mhm.
So that's the first thing. But then as a guy, you want to keep on advancing. One of the first advancements is you can get what I might call the baby priesthood. It's not as good as like the regular priesthood, but young boys at around 12 years old get the priesthood. In my upbringing, my dad did not believe in just giving a boy the priesthood because he turned 12. They needed to show that they were ready
Mm.
for it. He took it very seriously. And so I was like really about like, I'm going to make my dad proud. And he didn't give me the priesthood till I was like 14, because he was like, I just want to make sure you're like totally ready. And I got it. And then I went from that to like the big boy priesthood. And then I had to be a good enough person that he would then recommend me to my grandfather and the other church leaders that I was ready to be married. So everything, like my entire advancement, was through him. So it felt strange for me to cut that off,
Yeah.
because he and my grandfather, I mean, they're the people that I loved most and
Right.
respected the most. in my entire life. And so to then go disappoint them.
And it sounds like you had a great relationship with your family growing up. This wasn't one of those scenarios where, it was an abusive and dangerous environment for you necessarily. I mean, it was
Well,
fundamental.
that's a different conversation.
Oh,
Because it
really?
definitely was in some
Oh,
points.
no.
Yes, it definitely was. It definitely was. Physically and verbally, especially.
Mm,
And that's a whole other conversation because I was conditioned to think that that was normal.
mm,
It was normal to, oh, you are out 30 minutes past curfew, even though you're a young adult. I'm gonna like punch the shit out of you, and you're gonna take it like a man because you broke my one of my rules. No, there was definitely that. And
oh, my God.
um that was also, I mean, you brought up the traumatizing afterward. That became a part of it because once you start, I didn't realize that I had other things on the shelf like that. And
Oh,
once I start realizing and unpacking, oh, this is not cool. I'm not cool with this at all. And it happened. And then somebody that I did love and respect was doing it, but then I tried to rationalize it in some way because I had to for my own survival. And then again, starting to unpack all that, it brought up a lot.
mm,
But
absolutely.
tying this back to after I told him, and then going to social media, like everything's, it's like every step of the way is like a big becoming more and more raw and exposed.
Yeah.
But again, it was important to me that I told my dad, and I didn't want to hide in any closets anymore. And so I went to my social media and I made a video, was very respectful. I just said, I decided to leave my religion. This is probably the biggest announcement I've ever made. Some people are going to ask me questions like, does that mean you hate all of your blessings? Do you, are you throwing everything away? What's your problem? This was a very personal decision. I had no desire to say anybody else was wrong or that their life was wrong or that anybody in the church was wrong. I was like, for me, this is my choice that I'm making for myself.
Right. Right.
And even to like the people saying, does this mean you hate the like everything that you've ever gotten from it? Do you think it's wrong? I'm like, what it feels like to me is, it feels like I'm like this 20 something 25-year-old boy that is leaving his parents' house for the first time. Now, when you're 25 and you're going out on your own, you're leaving your parents' house, does that mean you hate your parents? Not necessarily. Like, does that mean that you're ungrateful for everything they gave you? Of course not. It just means it's time. Maybe overdue, even, but
But
it's
it
time.
it certainly can be received that way.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And that's what it felt like to me. It's like I am grateful for the things I've gotten, but I feel very strongly that this is my next chapter. And
Mm.
so just want to put it out there. So that was the tone, but boy, did it cause a shitstorm.
Oh, I can't even
Um,
imagine, dude.
yeah. So I wasn't the only, like, it wasn't unique to have anybody leave the religion per se. Like that had happened, but I think I'm the first to ever leave publicly.
Mm.
And so that Facebook post got a lot of heat, but it also, man, I had to grow up quick because uh, it had so much toxicity that I was not prepared for.
Mm.
About 99% of my friends and acquaintances that I grew up with became estranged overnight.
Wait, 99% of the people that you had essentially viewed as your family
Yes, and friends.
were just gone.
Yeah, people that I had shared intimate moments with and shared my deepest, secrets or thoughts, like immediately would just like, you're a fucking idiot. What are you doing? Like it wasn't the same. And
Wow.
even family members, brothers, sisters, certainly my dad and I were having issues at this time too, shortly after leaving. Um It was very isolating. And then I'm becoming the talk of the thing when I'm not even around,
Oh,
because
of
I'm hearing
course.
some friends come back to me and they're making bets on how long I'm going to be gone. Like some people are
Mm.
like, "Oh, he's going to come back. He's just going through this stupid
Just
phase.
having a little
He got
crisis. It's going to be
Yep,
fine. Yeah.
yep. It's the devil's getting a hold of him for a little bit because he started to travel the world, but he's going to be back." And people are like, "Yeah, dude, Calvin was so in it. There's no way he's going to stay out." Like there's all these things happening. I'm being talked about in church,
Mm.
over the pulpit, and um and then it hits home even more because then that led into question, well, what does that mean for my marriage?
Right. Because you're married with kids at this point.
Yeah,
Mm.
exactly. And at this time, I am now getting really serious about what do I want in my life? What kind of life do I want to have? Where do I want to live? At this time, at this point, I had moved when I decided to leave. I was out of California now and I was in Centennial Park. I was in the headquarters.
Right.
I had made the announcement video from there. And so that made it even worse because I knew I was going to be hanging out around people, but I didn't want there to be any, again, weirdness of like where do you stand? I would way rather know where somebody stood, like if they're in something, than pretend. And so I make the announcement video, but then I'm going out to the grocery store and I'm seeing these people that were just being nasty
Mm.
to me, and but it's just like awkward. And and then of course they're asking me like, and her, and stupid comments too, like from church leaders, like, give our daughter back. That's talking about my wife at the time. And
Wow.
people, and then that brings up other things like, uh wait a minute, like other people that are out of the religion,
Mm-hmm.
they're seeing the Facebook post too, and they're like, "Wait a minute, you're treating her like a piece of, like, she's an adult. She like let them go through this themselves." And so now that's becomes a thing. Um, but it ultimately did come down to, with us, like, what do we want? And we wanted very different things.
Mm-hmm.
She wanted to stay in. She wanted to stay around it. I wanted to definitely not live there, around there. And it it got to this place where I had to make the other very difficult choice, that it was like,
Mm.
for us to be true to who we are, we need to leave
Yeah.
each other.
Yeah.
And we did. And that was another big fat layer to this entire thing, because it was such a confusing time for me, because here I am wanting to make a life that's true to myself.
Mm-hmm.
But these first initial steps are the most painful
Yeah.
things I've ever done. I'm like, why is being myself so painful?
Mm-hmm.
And then it makes me question, am I doing the right thing? Because it is so painful.
Yeah.
And the best thing I can say going through this time period, well, I'll share something actually, just in case it helps someone. I got suicidal.
Mm.
Um, I didn't realize how that I was until, like, I had thought of it in like I think every human at some point questions existence and that sort of thing. But I didn't have, like, I just, for 30 years, I just, like, I'm like, this is not true anymore. I don't have it. And I'm fully, like, I felt, especially people that I once called friends, I didn't have that anymore. I felt like that I had been stripped naked,
Yeah.
thrown out of the camp, and I'm exposed to the elements. That's what it felt like. I'm just naked out there, naked and afraid. And there was one night that I I just been waking up every day wishing the cloud would go away, and it hadn't gone away. And then one night I walked to a park, and I still don't to this day know why I did this. It wasn't thought out very well, but I went up to like this light pole, and like a reaction almost, I bashed my head on the pole, hurting myself.
Mm.
And it was in that moment that I was like, oh fuck, I'm not in a good place.
Mm.
And I thought if I'm feeling this way now, where am I going to be in 2 weeks or 2 months? And so that night, I reached out to the suicide prevention hotline, and boy, am I glad I did.
Wow.
I didn't think anybody would get it in that space. I was like, where do I go to right now? Because the people, like, I mean, certainly my ex-spouse, like, that was the person that I could go to with anything, like, with all this. That's
Right.
gone.
Right.
My family, they're not understanding.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I didn't feel comfortable joining another church-like organization
Mm-hmm.
where it has these supporting elements. Like, I'm really going through this, what felt like quite alone and isolating. And so, and here I am, like, I and part of it was probably like, I'm just taught and conditioned to, like, to be somewhat skeptical of outside help, outside world. But I reached out just for the very reason. And, like, I remember telling the person, like, I don't even know if this is going to help, but because this happened tonight, I just am, like, doing this as, like, a precautionary measure, because I don't know what would happen in 2 weeks if I didn't. Because what if I got to the point in 2 weeks where I'm afraid to, even where I'm like, nobody's going to get it.
Yeah.
And so I don't reach out.
You know, one of the things that you mentioned in part one was the loneliness that you felt when you realized that you were having this crisis of faith, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's so relatable for a lot of people, because no one really understands how lonely it truly gets
Yeah.
when you discover that the truth you grew up with is a lie.
Yeah. And something so simple happened when I was on with this person on the other line. She asked, "What's going on? Just tell me." And again, I didn't think anyone understood, but this is such a simple thing. I told her everything that I could in, like, 2 minutes. Like, I was born in this, left everything, leaving my relationship. I just hurt myself, leaving everything I've ever known. Didn't think she understood, but she said 2 words. She was like, "That's hard."
Hmm.
That, and then I just burst out crying, because this entire time, it it meant, like, just another human being acknowledging it. Because I just realized, like, this whole time I felt like I was justifying with everything. Everybody coming to me, "Why are you doing that? Why are you doing that? Why are you doing that? Don't do that." And I'm, like, trying to give reasons, like, because this is what I feel. This is what feels true to me. This is the life that I want to live. And just having one other human acknowledge with those simple words, "Ah, that's hard."
Mhm.
It broke in such a good way. I just melted into a puddle. And what that ended up doing is, she told me about this organization called Holding Out Help. If there's anybody, especially that is connected to fundamentalist Mormonism, highly recommend this group. It's a organization that I didn't know about at that point, that specifically helps fundamentalist polygamist Mormon kids
Wow.
get on their feet. And that helped, because through Holding Out Help, I was able to, you know, they got me a therapist, which was
Hmm.
so freaking helpful during this time. Thank God for therapy
Hmm.
during this time. They were really generous to, like, "Yo, can we help you a little bit with groceries, just to take a little bit off of your mindset? Because I'm still needing to, like, take care of my responsibilities." I'm like, that would be really freaking helpful. Yeah. And then slowly but surely, I just started to learn things, like, that helped, like, just simple things, like, even all the justification. I, like, realizing with the help of a therapist, saying, like, "Do you know that you owe an explanation of your life choices to exactly 0 people?"
Hmm. Yeah.
That was so freeing to me.
Yeah.
Like, as long as you're not harming anyone, and you're not, and you're living a life that's different from theirs, and that's okay. You don't need to tell them that it's okay.
Right.
You just need to know that it is. And my therapist helped me realize that one thing: you owe an explanation of your life choices to exactly 0 other adults in your life. If you want to, you can. If somebody's in your circle, like, I got to learn about my own personal boundaries, like what's good and healthy. And in a strange way, what started then is reparenting myself,
Mm.
becoming this new human. And that's what I feel like even now is, I'm 35 now, so I'm 5 years into this new life. It feels somewhat fresh, like 30 I leave,
Yeah, it's
you know.
extremely fresh. You're only 5 years removed from
Yeah,
this
and
massive, life altering decision.
yeah,
Oof.
and um, you know, I leave it, then I leave the marriage, then I then COVID happens, and then I start questioning everything, and I'm like really having to put pieces in place. And then like last year, I'm like, I think it's New York City. I come to New York City on and off. I'm like, yes, it's that. I've picked my spot, and I've been here for 2 months. Like, I'm in it. I'm in it. Like, it's still happening day by day. Like it's not like I'm good. I'm happier than I've ever been. But boy, has it been a journey to get to this point.
Amazing. Oh yeah. I mean, what a journey it is from living in seclusion and isolation in the middle of nowhere, Utah. Well, I mean, you were in
Mm-hmm.
Salt Lake City, but
Well,
Centennial
it was a
Park. I mean,
suburb of Salt Lake. It was a suburb, so it
yeah.
kind of was. It was Riverton, Utah, to be specific. So
Okay.
my grandfather lived in actual Salt Lake, but my dad lived in a suburb. Which, yeah, and again, didn't go out to, public parks or anything. So yeah,
You go from that life to the life you have now, living in the middle of one of the biggest cities in the world.
yeah,
I mean, what an incredible dichotomy there.
I
You
love it.
know?
I feel like I didn't think I was going to get to where I'm at now with what I'm about to say. Um, for the longest time, I fucking hated like like my life and where I came from. In a
Mhm.
sense, I didn't think it was fair. I didn't know who I was mad at, but God, the universe, I'm like, the more I learned about the nature of who I feel like I am, truly, I was like, why would I be put into that? But I genuinely am grateful for it. And the reason I am is of this contrast, of this, like, you learn so well through that. And like, I don't know if I believe in past lives. I'll say this kind of cheekily, but I feel like if I have been born a lot, it's almost like I feel like my soul's like those magicians that like get their hands tied behind their back and thrown to the bottom of the ocean in a cage and try to get out. And I feel like that I was like, well, for this round, like, let's put me in a small town. Let's put me in a cult. Let's make me the 11th of 45 kids. And let's condition myself for like years and years and years, be homeschooled, and let's see if I can get out of that one. Like, that's what it feels like. And what I look at that as like a tribute, not to like the collective of the human spirit. Genuinely, like, I really think there is something cool about that, because I'm not the only one that has ever been through hard shit. There's been people that have been through way fucking harder shit. But there is something to me that is really cool when I reflect on the human spirit's ability to find something that matters, or find some sort of light through a little crack, and pursue it,
Mm.
and get out and make something of it. And genuinely, the perspectives that I get to have now wouldn't be as clear had I not been born where I was born, and had I
Yeah.
not gone through some of the hard stuff. Boy, do I appreciate relationships that let you be yourself. Man,
Absolutely.
like, I'm so grateful for that. Um and I have some really cool friends, and I know it's just getting started. I'm building my community now, doing the things that I want. It's one of the things I love about New York City is, here in New York, we like, there's one thing we care about. Who the fuck are you?
Yeah.
Let's see it. You
Uh-huh.
know, like, you don't need to be like, we prioritize genuine, direct honesty over niceties. You
Mhm.
know, if there's something Utah has, it has a reputation of being very nice, like Mormons are nice,
Mhm.
but being an insider, if there was an Olympic sport in passive aggressiveness, they also have that. Like because we're supposed to be nice, and so we might really think, I hate this person, but I'm gonna keep a smile on my. I'm so over that. Like,
In
if you
Texas, we
fucking
call it
hate me,
bless your
tell
heart.
me exactly.
Yeah.
I would rather you say, I fucking hate your guts, and I'm like, I appreciate you being honest about that. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
so yeah, so it's a full chapter turn at this point, and for the first time in my life, I feel like I finally have my feet under me in a really good way, where I'm like, okay, here we go. It's time to build something out of this life. Because the one thing I've learned in this whole process is, yes, I hope there's something before or after this, but the thing I do know is I've got this one,
Mm.
and if I've got this one life, I want to live it.
How powerful being able to live your true, authentic self. I think that's just so crucial for anyone watching this right now. Be authentic, be true to yourself.
Yeah.
Don't let your past, your upbringing, the conditioning you've experienced define you.
Yep.
It's just so, so, so important. I know one of the questions that got asked a lot for part one was, what happened to your wife and your kids? And we know your
Yeah.
wife wanted to stay
Yeah.
in the work.
Yeah. So she decided to stay, which again, I respect it, because that's her choice. You can't force anybody in their process. She's already remarried, she
Mm.
married to a great guy. And even with my own journey, knowing how I learned so well through contrast, like, this was a big thing for me to get to with my own kids, like what's going to be best for them. But she's a great mom, and they live with her most of the time, but they spend time with me as well. They can call me any moment with a watch. So we talk
Oh,
every
great.
single day. But
Awesome.
also, like, they were just out here in New York City for about 10 days with me. So they're getting to experience both. And as a parent, I'm excited about that, because I I have a lot of optimism for a human being that gets to have multiple exposures to different perspectives. So as long as you get to have that, and then you get to choose their life, like, they can choose whatever if they want to choose that, if they want to choose fundamentalist Mormonism, as long as it's done in a healthy way, okay. But at the very least, I want them to get to experience what they're experiencing by being in and around it most of the time, and also get to experience the outer world, the broader
Right.
world as well.
Well, and it's like you said, and I feel the same way. You're grateful for the experience you had growing up in fundamental Mormonism, as difficult and traumatic as it can be in and getting out. Right. I have the same mentality about my upbringing in a cult as well, and being able to use those experiences now to help others, which you are about to launch a podcast all about this stuff. Tell me about
Yes,
that.
I'm so excited about this. Cultured, that's the name of it. Keyword cult, cultured. A podcast about cults and culture from an ex-cult member. Launches August 4th. I've There's a lot for me to unpack. There's like I'm so grateful for this and other conversations that I've gotten to have. For the longest time, I wondered if I was going to talk about this at all, because I don't want to live in the past. But I don't think it is about the past. I think it's about, like, it's one thing to be living this life, but I think it is important to know the process to get to this life, the one I'm in now. So I want to talk about some of the things that the only way it can be unpacked is with a long form conversation podcast. And so I'm really excited for this. This is something that I've had a lot of people ask me about as I've done interviews. Like, are you going to write a book? Can you have a podcast? So I decided I'm going to do a podcast, unpacking fundamentalist Mormonism more, but also other cults. I'm going to dive into yours. You'll be on my show, if you
Very
will, Davey.
exciting. Absolutely. I'd love
Um,
to.
but I also want to have this personal element to it, where this human journey of growing up in a cult, the more
Mhm.
details around it, the good, the bad, and the ugly, the things I learned, the leaving it, going deeper with some of the stuff we talked about here, my life now, trying different things, sex, dating, all that stuff. Like, what's like, because things that people might take for granted, to me, it's like,
Yeah.
fruit taste a little bit sweeter. Sunrises look a little bit cooler, like having gone through that. And so I just want to share some of those perspectives, and maybe even I have like this lens too of like noticing other cult-like behaviors that aren't religious.
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking at you, MLMs. I'm also looking at you, yoga studios. Like, there's some funds I'll play with.
The
I don't
yoga
want
people are going to come after you.
Exactly. No. Hey, everybody's great. Like, here's the thing. All this is on a spectrum. And so there are communities that are like great, but it's like, just like, be careful. Like, as long as they don't go too far, then
watch
it's
out
like,
for that
okay,
high control behavior, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I'll explore that in culture and other parts of society, share the things that I'm trying that's new and all that sort of stuff. So I'm excited.
And you've got your
August 4th.
website, Cultured Pod.
Yeah, culturedpod.com. You can go there to be notified, actually. Put your information in so that you can be notified when the first episode drops or in any future episodes. So, yeah,
Fantastic.
culturedpod.com.
I can't wait for that podcast to drop. I know you've got so much to share, so much strength, so much hope, so much recovery. And I know that it's going to help a lot of people that might be still stuck in that mentality or are wrestling with their own crisis of faith potentially. So Calvin, thank you so much for doing this with me. This has just been incredible. Y'all go look him up. I'll be on the Cultured podcast as well. So you'll be able to see more of Calvin. Thank you again, dude. This has just been so incredibly inspiring.
This was fun. Thanks for having me.